Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us on our fifth webinar of the series. I know that some of you have joined us before, but for those that haven't, it's nice to see some new faces, and you're very welcome to join us today. My name's Martin Sutton. I'm from the Brand Registry Group, which is a trade association for brands that operate their own top-level domain, or for those that want to and intend to apply at the next opportunity for their own brand. In our previous webinars, if you've been joining us, we've been jumping, and we jumped the curve a few weeks ago, and that was very much focused on business case elements to support you and your organization and help build up the capabilities of your brand activities. Today I'm pleased to welcome back Peter Lamantia, the CEO from Authentic Web, to join us and present to us Jump the Curve Part 2. This is looking very much at the challenges that many face with status quo within organizations, but specifically around the brand TLD. And looking at ways, in practical ways, to approach and overcome that status quo inertia, and hopefully to drive fruitful change for yourselves and your organization in the future. So sit back and enjoy what Peter's got to deliver. In the process of the presentation, if you do have any questions, there is a question box that you can enter in any of those questions. And once Peter's finished his presentation, we'll come back to those and cover off any questions you may have. Okay, thanks very much, and I'll hand over to Peter. Thanks, Peter.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Martin. Welcome, everybody. So Jump the Curve Part 2. So we did the first one, as Martin mentioned, on how to build a business case. So we shared some math with you on that. And you know, the last one that we did with Chris Green with this SEO, I learned a lot of stuff there, and actually I've taken some of that stuff internally. So the purpose of the BRG is to try to help equip you with information to help socialize and drive your own brand top-level domain success. So today we're going to talk about Jump the Curve Part 2, which is really about the strategy. But just for those that may have missed the first one, I wanted to really talk about what it means to jump the curve in terms of how high-performing companies move through different technologies or changing environments or introductions of new products, and how that is really relevant to domains, DNS, brand protection, and TLS certificates. So the first real evolution of this, starting in the mid-90s, was around just systems to manage these areas. And today they're sort of operating manually in silos, ticketing systems, etc. The second evolution that some companies may have already adopted is really around thinking about automation with workflow, audit controls, and policy and role-based permissions to help you become more secure, more compliant with increasing regulatory authorities, and improving the performance of not only your digital footprint, but your people. The third one that we're going to talk about today is the brand top-level domain or brand registry. That is a secure, controlled space that you can drive innovation initiatives that's fully scalable, and most importantly, that it's trusted by audience. And that's what we're trying to help you understand today. We know that innovators beat spenders every day. So I went around the web and looked at some different market research on this just to validate this. And everywhere you look, you'll find that innovators beat spenders, whether it's on revenue, margin, or market cap. So we know that. We know that that's a fact. And we think about it. We think about spenders as incrementalists. So they invest $1 and they may return $1.10, $1.20 to the company. And that works until it doesn't. Suddenly things stop working because the world has moved on. But innovators are transformative, where they invest $1 to return $2 or $10 or even more dollars. These are the people that are jumping the curve. They're the ones that are driving forward. And we know it's risky not to innovate. There's some great examples that all sorts of business school business cases have been operated on. The first one we know is Blockbuster. In 2006, they had a market cap of $6 billion. In 2013, they went into bankruptcy. Netflix took over. And there are other streaming services such as Hulu, Disney, Prime, and others that have really taken over this market. Blockbuster failed to jump the curve to the new space. The other one, and maybe even more significant, that is Kodak. Kodak was a $30 billion company in 1997, and today it's a fraction of itself at $90 million, where the industry, with huge brands, have created hundreds of billions of dollars of market value in innovating digital photography, both hardware and software and other types of tools. And then there's a little company we all know called Microsoft. And in the early days, they were driving out Office with CDs. And then in 2011, they introduced Office 365, fully digital experience on a subscription-based model. And you can see what's happened to Microsoft's market cap as a result of, not just Office, but it's very evident and obvious to all of us who use Office products. So it's imperative that we drive the status quo away because it's stubborn. We know that we need to innovate. There's an innovation imperative. Every business school will tell you, we've been trained in it in everything we do. We continue to read research on it. We know we need to innovate to disrupt our own space and enter into new markets that we're trying to gain some traction in. But we resist change. We hear in meetings, well, that won't work. We can't do it because it's too risky or we don't have time. So why, when we know we need to innovate, is it so difficult to push against the status quo? Well, it's simple. It's just because we're human. We're risk averse. We like the comfort of how we operate today, and change is risky for us. So that's why we need leaders. We need cultures of innovation that's brought down from the very top of the organization. So for a little inspiration on that, I went online to find the favorite quotes on the status quo, and I found some really good ones that are worth just reminding us and giving us inspiration that this is true. We know it's uncomfortable to challenge the status quo. I like this one, that managers accept the status quo, but leaders will challenge it. Or the status quo takes commitment, courage, imagination, and above all, and I think specifically in this brand TLD transformation, it's a dedication to learning. Howard Schultz is a great one. Any business today that embraces the status quo as an operating principle is going to be on a death march. That's a good one. And then Ronald Reagan had an interesting one that I think describes the current status that we all face managing large portfolios, DNS and TLS, that he says the status quo, it's just Latin for the mess we're in. We know that's the case. We know we need to change. And that's what we're going to talk about today, about how to develop a brand top-level domain strategy that is proprietary, trusted, secure, you control it, and it's fully scalable. So thinking about the status quo, the imperative for change, we know we need to do it, but still it's difficult. So I thought I'd do a little poll. So Martin's going to put this poll up so you can respond to. So what are the internal conditions that rank at the top to challenge your ability to plan and deploy a brand strategy? So just think about your own organization. Is it lack of a sponsor or a champion? Is it general lack of value, knowledge, or understanding? Now, do we have the poll open there, Martin? Yeah, okay. Is it internal status quo resistance, like we're talking about? Or is it really the fear or risk of unknown? Or is it something entirely different? So I'll just give you a few minutes to think about that.
And it's Martin here, Peter. So the poll's up and running, that's fine. But I just wanted to mention that, for those that look after and support dot brands, perhaps just a general feel for which you think is the biggest impact in the list for your range of clients, and that would be helpful too.
All righty, let's give everybody a few minutes. It's a difficult thing. You know, the other could be many things that, you know, I sort of created this and I thought, well, you know, all of the above is probably relevant, but there might be one or two things that are just clearly, you know, above the others. So we're just trying to get a sense of what your views are.
So I'll share the results now.
Okay.
There's the results as we've got.
Okay. Okay, interesting. So general lack of value or knowledge or understanding. That's interesting. It's interesting to me that no one had fear or risk of the unknown. Well, that's good. Well, you're brave organizations then. Lack of leadership, of course. So very good, Martin. I'll just continue along. Let me know when people can see my screen again.
It's back up and running now.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that. It's interesting to look at that. So, you know, you sort of look at these things and you sort of see a whole bunch of variety. Everybody faces similar challenges and it's difficult to get things done. So why adopt a brand strategy when you think about, you know, the lack of general knowledge? So there's two areas that I always look at. One's on the defense side. So on defending your brand, for securing your organization and your network, reducing cost controls, there are some true benefits there that you can drive out of this. The other side of that is the opportunity side, where you can develop use cases to drive growth, support innovation, contribution margin, and all the rest of it. And that brings us back as a recap from the first business case jump the curve that we did. And we looked at a few things and quantified that. How can you reduce total cost of ownership? How can you improve consumer trust? How do you differentiate yourself to drive top line revenue growth or contribution margin? So those concepts were quantified into something that you can use internally to be able to support the vision, to get the sponsor and the champion inside the organization. And all of that was thinking about a brand TLD strategy and first thinking about what you're doing today. If you continue to do what you're doing today, you're going to continue to increase costs to support the organization with more domain registrations, increasing brand protection requirements. But if you start to invest in your brand top level domain, first internally to get alignment on what it means and what are some of the possibilities are, and then starting to educate your market to trust your own brand space, that's the point where you can start to reduce your total cost of ownership and end up in a place 5 years from now that is a much better place, where you have trusted brand position with a lower cost structure, something that you own, better communications, engagement, and abilities to improve security and compliance. So that's all well and good to say it, but how do we get there? So we're going to throw some concepts at you to hopefully will help you internally. So how do you do it? So the first thing you need is a vision. So you're going to have to develop that and help educate your organization to develop that vision of what it can be. And in that, what you're seeking to do is to engage with sponsors, to get a sponsor position to allow that permission to innovate, and then a business leader champion who's going to drive that. And then lastly, and very importantly, you need to have some sort of a product introduction process that can be introduced with cross-functional teams that starts very simply at gap and ideation. Where are we today? Where do we want to be in the future? From there, developing a strategic plan, execution plan, and then go to market. So that's the basis of what we're going to cover, and I've got a few tools for you to help you think about that. The vision to the plan. How do you get there? Well, first you need that sponsor or champion, and then you need a team to be able to execute. Now, the sponsor first or champion first will depend upon your organizational culture of whether or not you can go out and find that sponsor, or whether or not you may want to approach different leaders as a champion first. But to develop the innovation vision requires you to be able to communicate the status of what's going on in the brand top level domain space today. What are some of the future state visions for where you see the market, where you see your own organization, and why .brand? In my view, around why .brand is really around the business case. Executives respond to numbers, how you can reduce your total cost of ownership, how you can drive revenue growth or contribution margin opportunities. And then it's the educating the leader side, the marketers, the brand people, the business unit owners that are responsible for P&L. And we have to remember that these people have a disposition that domains are a pain and they don't get it. It's just a domain name, it's just a website. But because you're here, you understand that the domain and the DNS run everything in your business. So helping to educate them can be done through a few different means. The business case, understanding your business objectives, or this notion of .brand IQ that I wanted to share with you today as well. And then you have to have an ideation team and strategy team and a project methodology, something that I call the brand registry introduction path, or a product introduction path more generically. And the outcome of that becomes an aligned plan that's communicated and socialized inside the organization that gives you a real solid execution to be able to go forward, to go to market. But it all starts with the business, right? We have to think about what the business objectives are, first of all. What are we trying to do on top line, margin, how we want to differentiate ourselves? And then secondly, what are the drivers of that? Are we trying to drive more customer acquisition? Are we trying to introduce new products? Are we trying to upsell, cross-sell to drive revenue growth and margin improvements? What about web engagement? Can we improve the response rates or conversion rates and cross-pollinate audiences to create a more fulsome engagement experience for those audiences and customers that you're selling to and servicing? And social engagement. We've already seen some brands use their .brand in social, and because of the attributes of trust, they've been able to increase their click-through rates in some of their social posts. And brand position. Who are you as a brand? Can you use this to drive increasing trust and affinity to your organization? Can you demonstrate that you're an innovator and a leader in your space? Then, of course, security and product innovations. Using some of the control policies available to you with your brand TLD, whether it's DNSSEC, TLS, monitoring of that space, or identification research and development you can use for services or network security. And all of this is grounded by how you measure, analyze, adjust the changes that you implement in your organization. So let's come back to this notion of .brand IQ. What is it? This is something that occurred to me back in actually 2013 when I started to think about how companies and organizations and people inside can understand what they're doing, and where they are today is a brand persona and where they want to be in the future. So you think of it as an IQ distribution curve or a market adoption curve, where you think about what are the business objectives we're trying to achieve. It's universal that everybody has them, and how the brand TLD capabilities can be leveraged to drive those business objectives and achieve them. And from that understanding, you develop the use cases in ideation sessions and strategy sessions, and then create an execution plan in your go-to-market. And it kind of looks like this. So who are you in this group, and where do you want to be? We first have the dismissers. They didn't apply. They may be applied without knowledge of why. A couple of years go by and they decide to let it go. Then there are defenders. Many brands applied, not sure what to do with it, and it's still sitting there on the shelf with 1 or 2 domains up and really not doing anything with it yet and not sure why they should. And then there's the learner. So this is someone who owns it, starting to understand the capabilities review. They've got some ideation going on in use cases. They're starting to apply some dollars and people to understand how they can use it, and sort of shifting in towards the experimenter side that are doing test and learn campaigns, paying close attention to the market, starting to allocate a few more dollars and more resources to be able to drive it forward. Then the innovators who truly understand the capabilities and the use cases, have cross-functional teams working together to drive out new experiences and new innovations in digital. And then of course there's the genius side, who are really planning to disrupt their market, disrupt their operation, to really jump that curve in a big way. So the purpose of .brand IQ is to say, who are you today? Where do you want to be in 3 months, 6 months? And then what is that gap in how you're going to get there? We see lots of global brands in action. When you look at this sheet of these logos, these are leading organizations. And we had a presentation a couple of weeks ago by the folks at KPMG that switched everything over. There's a $27, $28 billion organization that's recognized the value and has had good success in driving it forward, and other leaders in the industry. And remember, 5 years ago, we had none of this. So we now actually have some businesses and brands that have deployed this that we can all learn from as we go forward. So how do we do it? So the brand registry introduction path is the idea of moving through a stage gate project methodology to introduce new technologies and products. So each is its own stage. At the end of that stage, there's an approval point where you present the views, the documentation of what you've developed as a team. That gets approved, or it goes back to be reset before you advance to the next stage. Sounds very much like our COVID phases as we start to reopen everything. I want to explain that a little bit more though. So think about these phases. So you're going to go into a phase, gap in ideation might take you a month, a couple of months. And in that, you're doing it with a construct of people, who's on the bus, who's the leader of that bus, what's the story, what's your .brand IQ, what are the use cases, what are the business objectives, and how you're going to get there. That's the strategy. And the process is this planning around the challenges, the systems, and everything you need, and what kind of budget do we need to drive this out. So that sort of looks at the first phase being very simple around the sponsorship, the departments and teams, external experts if you need them, the story again around capabilities, objectives, the process, how you're going to drive this thing through, how are you going to communicate it inside the organization, how you're going to project management it, what systems you need, how you're going to measure, analyze, adjust, and always important is the operating and the capital expenditures that you're going to need to go through. So the first part of that, and I'm just going to drill into the first one a little bit to give you a sense of how it's structured, is gap and ideation. So what's the mandate of gap and ideation? It's to develop a vision and alignment with a select group of people inside your organization to develop use cases to support those business objectives. And the result of that is an aligned vision as a strategic framework, not the full strategy, but the framework of what you want to do. Think of it as, the overview or the executive summary of what a full strategic plan could be. And it's a document of vision, the business case, and the objectives. Drilling in a little deeper on that, who are the people? So it's an ideation team to start. It's a small group of leaders in the organization that seek to innovate, where there's a champion, people from select departments or profit and loss centers, external if you feel you need them. And on the story side, what are we trying to do here? What are the objectives? What are the problems we face today achieving those objectives? What are these registry capabilities that could help us achieve those objectives, the use case and ROI? And importantly, in the first gap and ideation phase, it's important to ignore the constraints. Don't worry about the challenges. That will be solved by the process. which is really this notion of ideation to go to market, where you gain approvals at each stage. At the gated sections where you get approval to move to the next phase, where you can have budget approval for the next phase, project management, and constant adjusting cycle. Then on the money side, what do you need there? And it's small chunk, it's risk mitigated, in that you're only asking your organization for a small amount of money that could be internal resources or otherwise to get through gap and ideation. And the next part of the project gets funded by itself from another stage gate approval. So that's the principle, that you run through gap and ideation, you complete that, and then once you complete gap and ideation and you have your approvals, you then move to the strategic plan side. That's more fulsome. It may include some additional people, some additional stakeholders in the organization. Completing the strategic plan, getting that approved by the C-levels and the business leaders. Then you say, okay, we have our plan, now we need to do the execution plan. Now you're getting into the project schedule, you're addressing the constraints, the challenges in the organization of what you need to do to drive this forward. And once that's done, you're off and running, you've been approved, and you're in go-to-market. And once you get into go-to-market, you're off and out in the field, and you started that transition and in a cycle of measure, analyze, and adjust as you go forward, with strong backing of research that you've done and throughout this product introduction process to be able to support that modification and adjustment as you go forward. So I hope that's helpful. I'm going to summarize it quickly. There is an innovation imperative to jump the curve. We know we need to do it, and we need to do it to stay relevant in the market. Don't forget about Mr. Schultz's comments about businesses that do not. You need leadership permission to innovate. Without that, people underneath that organization will not move because they have not had that sponsorship to be able to go forward. A brand TLD strategy really starts with that vision and ideation. And to support that, you need the business case. You must do the math. If you don't do the math, you're not going to get any support to be able to go forward, because it won't have a proper justification to expend the money. And then it's about the process, the product introduction process, and very importantly, it needs to be stage gated. So you mitigate the risk and you allow for approvals throughout that project planning cycle to be able to move forward and have buy-in from all the different stakeholders in the business, and particularly the leaders of the business. I hope that's helpful. I'd be happy to answer a couple of questions. We wanted to keep it fairly short, but we're happy to take any questions if people have some.
Hi, thank you so much, Peter. And I'll look and check for any questions that come in. I've probably got one that I've got if there's none in the queue. So I mean, thanks, Peter. That puts it into a really good sort of structure to sort of like plan out and move ahead with changes here. So out of all of those stages, what would you say is the most important factor to make sure that you successfully execute that approach? Is there a specific area that you think is the most important?
I do. I think it's at the very beginning, if you don't have that sponsor, you're not going anywhere. And with that sponsor, you're going to get a champion. And I think I mentioned, you know, you can either start with the champion who really believes or really wants to innovate here to support you to get that executive sponsorship, because you need that to be able to support the cross-functional teams and that permission to innovate. In my view on that, to get that, you need to have the math done. So you need the business case done, because the numbers will ground the vision in reality to be able to set up the objectives of what we're trying to achieve, so the leadership can then look back and say, okay, were we successful on this? Did we achieve what we sought to achieve? So in a nutshell, you need to get a sponsor at a senior level within the organization.
Okay, so if you've got that and you want to push ahead, so you start creating all of these stages that you're going to go through. So you've got this sort of gating process. So if you were just about to start and prepare all of this, do you get a sense of how long it would take to implement?
Tough question, because I think the answer to all these things are always, it depends. It depends what type of use cases you're thinking of. For example, if you're thinking about deploying a new type of technology, you've got to get through development cycles from the requirements side to the specifications, use case testing, perhaps a beta deployment and release. That could take a year. It could take longer. On the other hand, if you've got some digital folks that just want to try out some microsites and do some A/B testing against your current domains that you're currently running versus the .brand to see what kind of response you get, that can be done really quite quickly. And I think it's something that people have noticed that have their .brand have been able to set things up pretty quickly. I guess the other one on that is, it's the cadence. It's the cadence of the project planning. So, are you going to have, a meeting per week, one per week? You'll meet with the small ideation and gap team, or is it going to be, once a month, or are you going to meet every day? So depending upon the urgency and how you're going to drive it, if you're really committed and you're going to do daily check-ins on where you are in your gap and ideation, you can move through this pretty quickly. But it really depends what you're seeking to do and how involved it's going to be. I think you think about a full transition the KPMG did, that took several months to understand, what they have, how they're going to change it, the structure, and go forward. So it depends, and it's up to you how you want to approach this, whether you want to boil the ocean or whether you're going to cut it off in a test and learn or launch something absolutely transformative.
That's fair enough, because I think the stages still apply. It's just
Absolutely.
that speed will be different and dictated by what you want to do. So, for instance, I saw the slide with a number of use cases that you highlighted, and some of those were perhaps less intrusive on the current digital space. So where people have used their .brand for social media as the UI partners, that doesn't impact their digital space per se, and is very easy to implement and not disrupt what perhaps some people would feel a bit nervous about first off when they're introducing a .brand into play.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Right, I don't see any other questions. Just one more then, in terms of looking, you mentioned the KPMG webinar that we had a couple of weeks ago.
Great.
I mean, they transitioned entirely, so that's a huge exercise. And one of the things that they were looking at was the SEO and the growth in organic traffic that they managed to achieve. At the same time, there was this aspect where we're told that the TLD itself doesn't really matter in terms of search engines. So there's some kind of disparities in that. Have you thought about that at all, and as to why that may occur?
Yeah, it's interesting. I listened to a gentleman from KPMG and also Chris last week talked about SEO and even threw some numbers that show that they've actually improved and they're driving more organic traffic. I kind of think, and I've heard this from a few companies that have sort of played with this, and you think about current web presence for a large organization. There could be thousands of pages there that have developed over a period of years, microsites, tons of legacy content, links, and some of those things may be detrimental to SEO in your current infrastructure. So when you start to apply savvy folks in digital with all the expertise that's going on and some of the learnings, just the exercise of doing that, it seems what people are finding is they're finding areas for improvement and to refresh it. So what I see happening is the web presence isn't optimized. And when they start to think about the transition, it's a fresh look. So they're creating a fresh presence that's dedicated, that when they're dedicated to recasting, it'll invariably lead to SEO benefits. So, and then from there, once they get a re-platformed on their .brand, now they've got a better SEO baseline from which to grow, to streamline digital engagement. So in a nutshell, I think while there's always been constant improvement in SEO in a current platform, until you actually look at the entire thing and work to redo it, I think that's creating benefit just by the focus on it. And I also believe that yes, the search engines say that it doesn't matter today, and I believe that. But I think that's chicken and egg. I do believe that as more brands drive out digital engagement experiences in their own space, that the search engines will change, because the search engines will want to deliver the most authoritative and the best response to searches that people make. And if brands create those in their own space, those will start to get ranked further. But that's speculation. We have to see what the search engines do in the future based on what we do or brands do to make that a reality.
True. So I've got one question here. Going back to the poll, we saw there was a strong indication that general lack of value, knowledge, or understanding was highlighted as one of the blocking points to strategies. Is there anything that you can suggest by way of overcoming that block?
Well, I guess the first thing would be to share all Martin's presentations. It's really around education. And my experience so far has been with companies that haven't applied, that are thinking of it. If you can get to chief digital officer, chief marketing officer, they get it pretty quickly. They're savvy people. They can see the value of an elegantly branded space with a very clear message, promotion.brand, and how that could improve them. So just, we're all inundated with information. It's an information overload everywhere, and trying to get the attention. You need to lock your CXO in a room and sit down with him or her and run through some of the examples of, what other brands are doing. Here's what a business case could look like. Here's what some of the SEO intelligence that we've seen and how we can even improve what we're doing today by adopting this. And here's a strategic way to go forward with that. There's these tools that, Martin and the BRG and the best practices group of putting together are really designed for that. The challenge now is getting the attention of those leaders to help them understand it. I think that, those folks, once they understand what you're talking about, and they see other brands doing it, and there's also, risk of, those brands leapfrogging, I think it'll make a difference. I also think that, when there's finally a date for the second round, I think we're going to see a lot more interest for the C-level to really understand what's going on here. So I think the wave is coming.
Great. Okay. Peter, I think we've covered all the questions here. Thank you so much. Thank you also for the presentation today. It's truly appreciated. I hope it helps those of you that joined us today and those of you that watch it at your leisure in the future to be able to accomplish more with your .brand. Meanwhile, do look out for the next webinar. That will be next week. Details to come out shortly. And it will be the last one of the series before we revisit this for the latter part of the year. So look out for that. Thank you very much, everybody. And we'll say bye for now. Stay safe.
Thanks very much, everybody. Thanks, Martin.
Thank you, Peter.